Welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here. Today is Tuesday, December 28th, 2021, and today we're going to be discussing the 2024 presidential election and be doing an update on my prediction on what seems to be one of the most likely matchups in the 2024 election. This being a prediction between Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Vice President Kamala Harris. So this is a very interesting prediction indeed. But before we do begin, I want to remind you guys to like, subscribe, and to turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. And also that Purple Political Talk channel memberships are now open. If you would like to become a channel member, you could do so by pressing the link down in the description or the join button next to the subscribe tab. And in that spirit, I did want to give a very big thank you to our Purple Political Talk channel member, Adam Hurst. We really cannot do this without you. Now that we've gotten all of this out of the way, let's get started with the video. So, I think that honestly, this matchup is becoming more and more likely as the time progresses. So, I think it was likely to assume, a couple months back that Trump was 80% going to run in the 2024 election. And while that might still be the case, I think that maybe not as big of an extent. I think the probability of Trump running has definitely decreased. We're looking at a political panorama where Trump could certainly run and do well with how things currently are in the country. I think that he definitely has the support to run for president. But, he's built up other things. And another important thing to know is that Donald Trump has not been in the spotlight as of lately. And that's going to be very difficult. He's going to have to build the momentum again. He doesn't have access to social media. That's going to be a problem for him. And with all of this being said, I do think it's likely that he does not end up running. And as for Joe Biden, which was the other piece of the equation that the Democrats are waiting to see, he likely is not going to run. He said he's going to run if he's in good health, but I don't think he's going to be, in the best state. And I think he's probably not going. He's going to decide against running in the 2024 election. And the only reason I think he has not announced that he will not be running in 2024 is that he still wants to have control of the party. Biden effectively saying, I'm not running in 2024 is officially going to start the Democratic primary season, which in other words means that, the Democrats they're not going to care about policy. They're not going to care about anything. What essentially they're going to be working on is 2024 campaigns, and that's going to be a big problem for him. So with this being said, I think that Ron DeSantis and Kamala Harris are the next people in line, if you will. Ron DeSantis in a more solidified way. I think that after Trump, it's Ron DeSantis, and then there's a big gap in the Republican Party. I think in the Democratic Party, it's Biden, and there's a very big gap, in kind of what the candidates could be in 2024. And, Kamala Harris is clearly, the pick successor. But with recent challenges in her own staff and problems that she's had, if you go back and look at her 2020 primary run, you saw that it really fell apart. She has a campaign issue. So a lot of those things could actually make it so, maybe Kamala Harris isn't even the Democratic nominee. But for the purposes of this prediction, Ron DeSantis and Kamala Harris are the two nominees. So I think this matchup would actually be very interesting. And it's going to be, a lot of these states are going to really differ, from past election years. And things are really going to be changing. So as of right now, I have the safe seats up on your screen. So that would be 125 electoral votes for the Republicans and 183 for the Democrats. So what's really going to be decisive again in this election, like in any other election matchup, is of course the swing states and the toss-up states that are going to make a difference. So let's start by covering the Democratic likely states. So these are states that would go by a margin of between 5 and 15%. That's a pretty big margin. So I think, Kamala Harris, even though she has her, spouts of unpopularity, she's clearly more unpopular than Biden, and Biden is not as popular as he used to be a couple months back. Places like Colorado, I think, will still probably vote solidly with Kamala Harris. I think, places like Virginia would likely vote on the lesser margin of that, so probably around 5, 6, 7%. For Kamala Harris, I think that in many ways, someone like Ron DeSantis that's too much like Trump. People used to say in Virginia when the Democrats were campaigning there, one of the scary people they used to point out was Ron DeSantis. So I think that in many ways, Ron DeSantis is not going to have the same success as someone like Glenn Youngkin did in a state like Virginia. So, I think that's something else that is going to be interesting about this election, that, in a lot of these places, it's going to be, the Trump policy without the Trump the person versus kind of the Biden administration's continuation, right? And in places like Colorado and Virginia, I don't think that they're not excited for Kamala Harris, perhaps, but I think they're more excited to vote against someone like Ron DeSantis. Out of the Democratic states, I think though that's the only likely states. I think that coming into 2022 and further into 2024, it's going to be something that the Democrats are going to be really battling against. Is that they're really going to have to battle against a lot of voters who have completely gone against them, who have moved on from their messaging. And I think in places like Colorado and Virginia, you're going to be seeing that happening. Now, moving on to the Republicans, there's certainly a lot of states where I think they're going to have likely margins, including Texas. I think it's likely that they would win by a comfortable margin in the state. Florida's home, Ron DeSantis' home state, I think he will do very well, especially against someone like Kamala Harris. A big reason why Joe Biden didn't win in Florida, in big part, it was because he had a very bad Hispanic appeal, especially amongst Cuban, Venezuelans, and Puerto Rican Americans that make up a big part of Floridian Hispanic population. But two, the Democrats have lost that excitement. And I think that in many ways in places like Florida and other states like Texas, the Republicans have really used that to their advantage. And it's something that in the 2024 election, I expect someone like Ron DeSantis to continue to, gain support in those places. Additionally, I think Iowa, Ohio, Maine's 2nd District are all places where the Republicans are going to build further support and, build and solidify wins. And Iowa and Ohio are states that have really moved away from the Democratic Party over the last election years. And, 2020 was a solidification of that. In an election year where the incumbent president, the Republican, was very unpopular, he was able to win by, a pretty comfortable margin, especially considering that these states went for Barack Obama as recently as 2012. Now, if you look at places like the Sun Belt, I think that Ron DeSantis is definitely the candidate for those areas. And, the Democrats are going to have a very tough time when it comes to picking candidates. If they pick the wrong person for these elections, they're clearly going to have issues when it comes to those races. So that covers all our likely states. Let's now move on to lean states. Lean states are states that would go between 1.5% and 5%. So still moderately close, but a little bit and they're still very competitive. So, but they're not down to the last votes that we could see in some states in the 2024 election. So let's start off with the Democrats. So I think that places like Minnesota are still going to end up voting for the Democrats. I think there's a possibility of Minnesota moving a little bit further to the right, considering a lot of the different trends that are occurring in the country. Along with that, I think places like New Mexico, they have a lot of Democratic support here. I think that if everything is like completely worst case scenario for the Democrats in 2024, we could be looking at New Mexico going for the Republicans. However, I do think at this point in time that New Mexico will still hold on for the Democrats. Same thing in New Hampshire. I mean, especially with Ron DeSantis on the ticket, I think that the margins could definitely become less, especially because, he's exciting. Now, I think since a lot of the voters in New Hampshire are college educated, they're really going to be looking at the fact that, Kamala Harris and the identity factor and look that as a big benefit as to Kamala Harris. But I do think that Ron DeSantis could definitely build up support in these areas. Again, maybe not winning them in, a completely normal matchup, but getting close and, making those margins tighter. And, a lot of these things also have to do with, number one, the Democrats have lost support and their base is not excited to vote for them. And this could be, we can point at a lot of different things. Number one, you can point at, the Democrats making too many promises when they really shouldn't have. And I think when you look at the 2020 campaign of Joe Biden didn't really promise anything while he was promising everything at the same time. He was promising to build back better. He was promising to, go back to normal. Now, it's going to be very difficult once you're in a global pandemic. So I think that's something that a lot of voters, especially in areas like the Sun Belt, are really going to be taking a look at. And in places like New Mexico, New Hampshire, Minnesota, those are going to be influential factors. As for the Republicans, I do think that there's places they could win back. I think places like North Carolina easily go in the lean margin. Around 2 or 3%, I think they could win support there. And I would go as far as saying against Kamala Harris, I think that places like Georgia places like Arizona could go by at least 1.5%. I mean, I think at this point, someone like Ron DeSantis especially could get a lot of suburban voters in these areas that, they flip for Joe Biden. Now, I think that they could, go back and revert to the Republicans with Ron DeSantis. And if he picks the right running mate, those margins could definitely be increased. Now, moving on to the tilt states. Tilt states are states that would go by less than 1.5%. So these are states that almost every single vote counts. So we have 4. I think Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are going to be extremely close come 2024. And again, these are going to be deciding factors for this election. I think that all of the Rust Belt in its entirety will vote for Ron DeSantis by a tilt margin. I think the closest state will certainly be the state of Michigan. I think that Kamala Harris should be able to win some support there. It's going to be very tight. It's also going to be very tight in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. But I think generally speaking, we're looking at a race where in those states, we're going to see the Republicans do moderately well, increase their margins from 2016 maybe. And I think that with the situation of the country, I think it's something that the environment is really positioning itself for that. One state that I forgot to fill in for some reason, Nebraska's 2nd District. I think Nebraska's 2nd District likely will go to Kamala Harris by possibly a lean margin. I think maybe a tilt margin. I think that, definitely Ron DeSantis has the possibility of making that district closer. But last but not least, we have the state of Nevada. I think that this is a state the Republicans have a very good shutout coming at, the next couple of, years. I do think, though, in 2024, the state of Nevada will still go for the Democrats, considering the fact that, there's a lot of types of voters that live there that are going to go vote for the Democrats regardless. Now, if we're seeing a lot of big changes in the Hispanic population regardless, if we go every single community of Hispanics around the country, not just in Florida, not just in Texas, but we see that change in Hispanic voters in Arizona, in Nevada, in Colorado, in California. If that is, if that's something that we can see, then I think Nevada is certainly in play for the Republican Party. So, as you can see, my final prediction is 306 electoral votes for Ron DeSantis to 232 electoral votes for Kamala Harris. So, I think that it's certainly going to be a very interesting and close election. I think that this map is really being generous in some ways with, with both parties. I think the Democrats could have way worse and the Republicans could have it way worse. I think this is a very fair map. And looking at the data that we have now, I think with Biden's approval rating, with how Republicans have definitely increased their support in many different ways, it is something that looks more like a possibility come 2024. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If so, please give a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. I'll see you guys later, and goodbye.